Oh,
But everybody, yay, I enjoy Kate's. And also Kate, transfer it to someone else for host if they want to do pair programming and stuff after. I'm gonna head out because I think my internet's about to go, but I will watch your recording and I will be back to regular programming next Thursday.
great. Okay, can
Bye,
everyone,
everybody.
bye, bye, Kelly. Have a good trip. Can everyone see my screen? So yes, okay, just checking. All right, so let me do slideshow. Can you still see my screen? Okay, awesome. So just a little intro on me. This is kind of a long intro, but I'm currently a product manager at Moody's Analytics that Callie just kind of went through. And I have kind of a unique background. I've had several roles, both at Moody's and outside of Moody's. I've worked in marketing, sales, which I was not very good at. I was not a good salesperson. And I've also been a UX designer for the past 3 years before I moved into product. And I think that gave me a really unique perspective of all aspects of a product, kind of the business aspect, thinking of what the user's actually doing, and then also kind of designing for the user. And kind of also all those different roles really gave me a really kind of solid background, I think, in just kind of managing different hats and a lot of different projects and trying to keep everybody organized, which I think kind of in the end, like product is a lot of, you're kind of a generalist and kind of a lot of things. And I think that really kind of taught me that. I currently actually live in Zurich. I moved there about a year ago, and I just recently passed a German exam in order to live there. So I now speak a little bit of Deutsch, which I didn't before I moved here. So anyway, moving on. So just to start, and again, I'm not too sure where everybody's coming from, if you've worked on dev teams before, or if you worked on small companies or in larger companies, but these are just kind of some of the questions that I was thinking about when I was going through this presentation was, how are teams structured? So whether that be at a smaller team, which I actually should have mentioned, I did work on a iPhone app as well for a couple of years on the side, which I don't think Moody's would necessarily want to know. But I did just kind of commit a few hours a week to working on a fitness application. So I also have perspective on kind of a really small team, really, really small, versus a really, really large team, which is where I am now. So how are those teams structured? How do you work together? And kind of where does the dev team fit into that? And then also, how does the dev team specifically work with the product owners? So like, what sort of meetings do you have? How often do you connect with them? What would I expect of one of my devs, and like that sort of thing? And then also, how can you as a dev be a strong asset to the team? Because I think that sometimes a lot of new engineers join a team, and I feel that sometimes they feel like they're kind of just taking stories and they're kind of just building what they were told to build. But I would argue it's so much more than that, that you should be asking questions, you should be understanding who your user is, you should be understanding why you're doing something. And if you don't, you should speak up. So we can talk about that as well. So moving on, kind of a quick overview, kind of how a typical software development team is structured. And this is kind of similar to how my team is structured, because we, again, have the capacity. Moody's, I think, has like 13,000 employees or something. But my team, I have about 16 people supporting my product specifically. So our team is largely structured kind of like this. And again, this kind of changes based on where you are. It also changes based on like industry trends. Like, for example, this is a BA here, business analyst, all the way on the left. And you could also argue that sometimes the product manager also plays that role. So just kind of looking at this real quick. In the middle, we have the product manager. So that's me. And you're kind of thinking large scale of what is the product vision, what is the user problem that you're actually trying to solve. Then you have the UX designer. So they're the one, they sit really closely to product, and they're the one that's actually kind of for the first time understanding what that problem is and then trying to put forth some solutions via prototyping designs. How are we going to solve that? And then we also have software engineers. I'm guessing that's all of you guys. We have DevOps, and then QA, and then business analyst to me is, I mean, we don't really have BAs anymore actually at my company, but they basically translate what that business need is into language that the developers will be able to understand in order to build what they need to build. So I'm also kind of playing that role right now. So these kind of roles kind of can kind of be give or take, kind of depending on what your team is sort of looking for. So again, yeah. So what does product do? The business is really represented by product, and in the end, we have to understand what is the problem we are trying to solve. So for me, I don't want to put any new features into our product unless I specifically heard from a customer who is currently using it that it is solving a problem that they have. And also my team actually is sort of like an incubator team at Moody's, and our job is actually to build products from scratch completely. So this was kind of the foundation of how I started, was where is the need in the market? Where is there a problem that is not currently being solved? Because then you know for sure people will go to your product to solve that problem. So yeah, and I think also too, product really building trust with the dev team. So I think as a developer, you want to make sure that what you're building is solving those customer problems. So I think it would be very fair to raise your question or to raise your hand and say, hey, like in what customer interview did the customer say that they needed this like particular feature? I would love to watch them say that. I would love to watch them kind of interact with the product so that I can have a better idea of, where exactly that need's actually coming from. And the other thing that product really does is kind of prioritizes all of these needs. So you're also getting, the business is telling you certain things like their product must do X, Y, and Z by this date. And then you're hearing maybe from subject matter experts, oh, we think your product should be doing this. And then you're also hearing from actual customers. So I'm kind of getting all these requests for the product to be changed in some way. And then I have to be prioritizing all of those needs and being able to put together some sort of list or a backlog so that when developers actually start doing work, that list is perfectly prioritized based on that customer need, which then if customers' problems are being solved, most likely they'll be paying for the product, which will hopefully result in more revenue, which is where I'm currently at right now because my product launched in November. So we are trying to have somebody buy it right now. So that's super exciting, but nobody has actually bought it yet, but we are working on it and we are very close. It's a really big product, so we're gonna get there. So anyway, this is a little diagram that I saw as well. So again, kind of what I said, the PO is kind of doing many things. And there's also product owner, product manager. Sometimes they're used interchangeably. Some companies don't have a product owner and they have a product manager. So again, it kind of just depends on the needs of your own organization. And how does dev work more with product? Okay, so on a typical week, I usually meet with my dev team several times and then kind of one-on-one based on maybe what they're actually working on and if they have any questions. So I'm usually checking in on their progress. So sometimes that's if we have one stand-up every week, which is kind of when stand-up is when I get the dev team together, and it's actually called stand-up because it's supposed to be so short that everybody can give their update standing up. Now, granted, like we're all on Zoom, so sometimes people take a little bit longer than they should be taking, but usually it's about 20 minutes and all 15 devs go through what have they worked on for the past week, where are they in their current tickets and in their current projects, and then kind of are there any blockers or are there any questions they need to kind of connect with someone else who's actually on that call. And then sometimes we also have like a sprint review where we review demos of something, or maybe someone has a question of something that they're currently building and they want me to just look at it, or they have a question on text or functionality, something like that. They often, again, have questions based on maybe a requirement that I wrote that wasn't very clear, or I thought it was clear, but obviously when they started building it, it wasn't very clear. And then also helping them, or they help me groom user stories, because I'm also, if you saw my background, I'm not a tech person per se. So I definitely lean on the tech team to help me really write these stories from a technical perspective of what needs to get done when it comes to breaking down work. Because I know high level what I want the user to be able to do, whether that's like downloading something, or maybe I want them to be able to open a new page with a new diagram. I know that piece, but they're going to be able to help me break it down. What steps do they need to do in order to build that feature? So that's kind of us working together to really refine the backlog and kind of all those stories from like an epic story standpoint. And yeah, so these are kind of just some typical meetings that we do every week. Sprint planning kind of happens when I talk to the head of the dev team or the tech lead, and me and him kind of go through that backlog and we say, oh, like, how do these stories fit in terms of sizing? We also talk about, who has capacity. Maybe someone's on vacation that week and they won't be there. And I kind of talk about maybe someone's really specialized in front end, right? And we have a lot of front end stories. Well, maybe we'll assign those stories to them. So this is essentially kind of just a planning meeting. And then they have a daily scrum. Ours, again, is a weekly scrum. For me, I just felt like daily just felt like too much. And I kind of trust people to just be kind of doing what they need to do. And if they had a question, they would just reach out to me. But some companies do a daily scrum. And I know even some of our teams do a daily scrum. And every single day at 4 o'clock, they're all kind of talking about, hey, what did they get done today? Where are you at? Kind of that sort of thing. And then there's a sprint review. So kind of at the end of a sprint, which is usually about 2 to 3 weeks, we kind of make it fun. I kind of, we can have coffee or whatever, and let's like go through some demos of what you guys worked on for the past 2 to 3 weeks and kind of show off all of your work to the team. So they'll kind of be showing, hey, I built this new feature. We did something last week where it was a new functionality with like a new modal that actually popped up. So the person was able to show that to everyone and like kind of walk them through what the user would be doing. And then we also have sprint retros. My Zoom is blocking it. Sprint retros, yeah, not reviews. So sprint retro is essentially, we should be doing more of these. Actually, it takes place at the end of a sprint. We probably do it once a quarter, which is when the whole team gets together and kind of talks about, hey, what worked well, what didn't work well. Someone tells me, hey, like, I think you were not very clear on this. Like, we didn't really know why we were doing this. Or maybe I'd say, hey, like, I think we missized that. I think it could have been maybe done a little bit quicker. So we kind of just give each other feedback with no harsh feelings. And we kind of use that feedback to improve going forward. And then this backlog refinement, which is kind of me and that tech lead, we just kind of continuously look through that backlog. So all those requests I'm always getting from the market and the business and users, I'm just kind of dumping them into this backlog. And then I'm always going through it. So I'm like every 2 days, I'm kind of always looking at it. What's new. And then I kind of also prioritize bugs or some other issue with the product kind of a little bit at the top. So that's kind of an overview of daily, weekly, kind of what product is doing and what product is trying to manage kind of all at the same time. Let's see. So how can I, as a dev, as an engineer, be a strong asset to the team? So I think definitely a few things have stood out to me for the engineers that I really enjoy working with. And I think it's those that are definitely go-getters and want to try something new. And they always raise their ticket, maybe, or they raise their hand for either complex tickets or like especially bugs that are data oriented. So some sort of bug that's coming from a data issue. Those are really difficult to solve because you're looking at these multiple pipelines, ETLs, and I feel like nobody really wants to do that, which I totally understand. But I think every once in a while, someone should just raise their hand and just try to be the person to investigate what that ticket means. And I really appreciate it because, yeah, totally get it. I think it just shows like a really kind of good attitude. And then also just, as soon as you're done with one ticket, just kind of going into Jira yourself and picking up another ticket. And just kind of always be kind of challenging yourself. And then to that, always be learning. So I think Callie is a great example because she tells me she's like studying all this stuff, at night on her own and like on the weekends. And I think whether that be not just about maybe dev related things, but just like what market are we in, like either like other ideas for the product. Like I've had devs kind of come to me and be like, hey, like, I think this should be a really good idea. Like I watched this customer interview and I learned about this bank that we're trying to sell to, like maybe they'd be interested in this. And I think that's really cool to hear from them because I don't usually get to. And I think it's always good to have multiple perspectives from the whole team. And then always asking questions, speaking up. I do find like, again, some engineers just tend to be more shy, which I also agree that I feel like modern workplace kind of favorites like being extroverted, which I don't necessarily agree with, but I think that having the courage to raise your hand and be like either I have a question, like, this doesn't make sense to me. If it doesn't make sense to you, it probably doesn't make sense to other people. And then let's not go building something that, has an issue or isn't going to work. Someone actually just called me today because the logic on something that I wrote for the story didn't make any sense. And when he showed me, because he actually went kind of far and started building it maybe halfway, and then he was like, actually, I don't think this actually makes sense. And I was like, you are totally right. That does not make sense. I definitely made a mistake. So we actually went back, fixed the story, and then he's able to finish it probably by the end of this week. So if he didn't speak up and just built it, I mean, we would have had to like do a re-release or whatever, and it just would have taken more time. And the other thing I really love is when devs can explain super complicated technical things to me in a really simple way. So for example, we have a database engineer and he's telling me about how he's optimizing the code, and I understand that only from the perspective that it's saving us a lot of money. So he tells me like when he started, we were spending however many a month. I think it was like, I don't know, 30,000 a month on some sort of Moody's was spending on some sort of backend thing. He's been working on it, and now we're spending 10,000 a month. Now that I can understand in terms of it's just being more efficient. I do not understand exactly all the technicality of what he did, but he was able to explain to me. He actually came to me. He was like, this is why this is important because of X, Y, and Z, and because it's going to save us this much money. And I understand that. So I think those are things that really, to me, are really, really valuable. I think there's probably more to this list, but these are just the people that I really kind of enjoy working with. And okay, so here is an activity. I figured we could kind of all work through it together. So basically, dev teams often receive bad requirements from product owners. So that's me. And unfortunately, this happens often, probably also me, because I'm doing 1,000 things. To me, I think that the requirement is clear, but it's usually sometimes not. So then I get a bunch of questions. So basically, I have an example here. So we're gonna assume that this is that you are a dev, and this was the story, or this was the task that you were given. And the title of the task is just download report. And then you have two kind of sub acceptance criteria here. You have the user can download a PDF report at the end of the session, and two, the report has relevant information in it. So I was wondering if anyone or everyone could kind of give me some ideas in terms of what information here is missing, or what sort of like questions would you have about this acceptance criteria and what isn't clear about it? Yeah, Jillian.
Hi. So the first thing that came to my mind was where, like, do you want this done? How do you want this done? Do you want a button? Do you want, like, exactly how do you want this, the user to be able to do this? And the second thing that came to mind was that, relevant information is pretty vague. So I think some more specifics about it. And perhaps the third thing would be what the report should look like. Like, is there an example format of what you were thinking of? So that you're not trying to sort of read someone's mind as to what they thought they wanted produced, and you thought something very different.
For sure. I mean, you nailed 3 right on the head. I think that was great, like a really, really great start. I think what you said about the button, that's a great example. It's just something that they're scrolling at the end of a page, and it's a button at the end of the page, or is something maybe at the top? Like, is it at the beginning of their task? Is it at the end of their task? All really, really good points. Any others? Any other ideas? There's always more detail to add. Gloria.
Maybe what they consider the end of the session. That's kind of unclear of like where you think the end is. Like, is it at the end of a form or something? Yeah, that's a little vague.
Totally. I think that's another really, really good point. So I think you will all see requirements like this a lot. And I think it's about saying what you all just said, which is asking these questions. And then I think consistently, hopefully, if you're working with a product manager that's really open to also growing and to also learning, to realize that they need to improve how they're delivering these requirements to you, so that you're not always going back and asking them kind of these clarifying questions. And I think that that also shows kind of how on top of it that you are, because you're able to identify kind of these gaps before you even start working. Yeah. Wella?
Yes, hi, it's Etwela.
Tuela.
Yes, so one thing I guess I would ask too is after they download the PDF, like where I guess would they want to be taken? Like is there any sort of, maybe pop up or did they get redirected somewhere? Like
Mhm.
I think that would help actually complete that story, right? Versus just they download something with information in it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Totally. Really, really good point. Any other ideas as well? All right. Thanks everybody for participating. Yeah, so I have another kind of more formal response to that, was how can I improve requirements? So there is this thing called definition of ready, which is really when there's a checklist that dev kind of helps product determine of when something is ready to be worked on. Now, granted, I think that like a lot of things, product development is sort of this like ideal space where like we're all ideally supposed to be working in this way that makes the most sense and like everybody's efficient and following all the rules. We do have a definition of ready, but I can tell you right now, I think we've used it like once or twice. And I just kind of finish a story and I mark the status as ready to go. And I don't necessarily go through this checklist. So it's always like a good reminder for me. I should be going back, working with my tech lead and say, hey, is there anything else in this story that you think that I need to include to make sure that it's defined as ready? And then this as well, it takes some time to analyze things before they get into your backlog. You have enough examples to identify patterns and time and fix them. So I think also too, being active in the backlog, because devs also have access to, well, you usually have access, hopefully, depending on where you are, to just kind of the product backlog, like stories that are just coming down the pipe. And just kind of seeing like if there's any sort of pattern, like maybe the product person that you're working with always forgets to add like, I don't know, an assignee, or there's never a size to the ticket, which size, by the way, is kind of telling the team like how many days or like how many weeks would a ticket take to actually finish. Like maybe I'm always forgetting to add that, and then you start to see patterns. And I think being empowered and confident to give that person feedback is really, really big, because then if I kind of heard from enough of my people that, hey, I think you're kind of missing this each week, and it would really help us if you were able to actually include this information, I think that we would all just be better for it. And then reporting any inconsistency immediately to product, yep, and keep track of them all along the project. So we have a discussion backed by some data and how to reduce them. Yeah, for sure. So that's kind of just when you're talking with somebody about maybe like providing feedback, just kind of point to some examples, just some things that you've been seeing. And I think just coming from the perspective of, hey, like I'm just looking to help us improve how we're working, and this is kind of what I've been seeing. And I know whenever I've kind of been tasked with that, I think it's just been really helpful, because we've only been able to accomplish more things together just because of it. So I definitely think that dev has a role in helping product improve for sure. Let's see. And yeah, so that was actually my presentation, about 30 minutes. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of just like open to any questions, and Gillian.
Hi.
Hi.
I was part of a boot camp, and we had I know it's an artificial situation because we had all developers and they were all the beginning developers. Um, and what happened was that I was a little more experienced, so I was able to say, hey, this component and this component are basically the same thing. Can we just build it once and then reuse it?
Hmm.
And I'm thinking though that that would not happen in a production kind of company because somebody else would be figuring out some of that perhaps. Um, especially because they didn't see it, they couldn't see it because they were still new, right? So there was some pushback, but
Mm,
I'm like,
I
build
see.
it once, guys. So just wondering if that kind of scope of work is usually determined sort of outside of the dev roles at a company, by the designers or by the UX people. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question. That's a detailed question. So we um yeah, so I would say that's a combination, because actually we were just working on this with my current product. Was we had basically no design library or no components built. So part of the sort of revamp that we were doing was actually building components for the first time. And then I was able to talk to the developer and the UX designer, and they were able to explain to me, hey, this is going to take us maybe a little bit longer in the beginning to actually build these out, but once we have these components built, we can just reuse them over and over and over again. It's actually going to end up saving us time. So it ended up being a meeting with me, the tech lead, and the UX designer, and kind of the three of us ended up talking about that. So I wouldn't say, I guess it was, I mean, I guess dev would have a seat at that table because they want to, I mean, they're, especially our app team, like they want to know like what is the component that they're going to be using, how will they use it going forward, and then how will that save them time, because everybody I think wants to do the least amount possible, which I also do. So yeah, but good
Exactly.
question. Hopefully that
And just another question too, like, does someone kind of take charge of your naming of your components and your classes so that they're also very consistent and reusable? Just curious about the process that happens.
Well, that is such a good question. Yes, and that is more to the UX designer. And then also I spent a few years on the UX team, totally different department at the time, but we had our own design system, and the UX designers would usually be naming the components. I guess if there is any like big feedback from a dev, I'm sure they'd be like open, but usually they're naming it in a file. And I wish I had an example here, but we would have like a large Figma file, and one of them would just be labeled components, and then each component would kind of have its own artboard, and then there'd be labeled very specifically of what that component is, by the UX designer.
Well, that's great. I saw a talk once about how it kind of went sideways with components, that they started off with three types of buttons, small, medium, and large, and then it became this weird thing like where the button changed color, and then
Oh,
they called it extra small button now, but really it had a different color. And so it was an interesting talk on scalability and just the important thing about being organized from the get-go. Otherwise, to refactor something like that is massively huge, because now your button's being used in a different place, and
mm,
maybe it's not even in the original place. So if you change it, then now it's wrecking 3 or 4 locations. So it was a good talk.
totally.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Yeah, and I think yeah, that, I mean, that goes twofold, right? Is the scalability side, but then also wanting to have enough flexibility, enough choices that you have kind of all of your use cases covered. So I think also as we're going to design forward now, I'm trying to use these components that we currently have to solve new problems. And sometimes you do need a new component, but if you start just labeling things
Yeah.
in a way that doesn't make sense, I mean, that's just disaster. It's gonna be a disaster. So
Spaghetti.
yes, exactly. Exactly.
Thanks.
Any other questions? All right. If anyone here's a bird out my window. It's super loud. Okay. So that is everything that I had for you guys. I can stop sharing my screen. Gloria.
I have a question. I had a team that I was on once, like for an internship, that really had a hard time assigning story points accurately, and so our team was never meeting the deadline. And I don't know, like what happens. Like I knew I was just there for a few months, and I always overestimated because I was new. I was like, this is gonna take me forever. But it seems like, what do you do in that situation if your team is not allocating points properly?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think well, we would start to see it because Jira and kind of all these like tools have some sort of like a velocity report or this report that basically comes out that says like how is your team performing, and kind of based on that sprint planning meeting and based on the sizing of everything, and you're kind of expecting to complete that in 2 or 3 weeks, and then consistently if you are not doing that, then yeah, I think that in terms of addressing that, like from a dev standpoint though, like to me, that would be like product should be like, ding, like there's something going on here that the way that I'm communicating with that tech lead or during that sprint planning meeting, either we're not going into enough detail in those stories, and maybe we're not understanding like all the steps that dev is going to be have to do to actually solve whatever that problem is. I think it's kind of going back to that initial kind of grooming planning meeting and really getting either deeper into the weeds there. And that's how where I'd raise my hand and be like, hey, like maybe this task that actually involves 3 additional tasks that we aren't really thinking about, or edge cases, or like whatever it is. Because I know that edge cases always get us because we're a database product, and there's always this kind of weird edge case with like 1,000 nodes on this diagram, and then the person has to take so long to kind of solve for that one issue. Whereas if we kind of think of that during that initial planning meeting, I think that's where we kind of solve a lot of the points issue. And yeah, that's actually, I mean, that's a good question, because like we kind of have like some sprints, like we do it, but other sprints, things were not kind of sized right. But sometimes like people are out, right? They're on like vacation, and then someone else is gone, and then and then there's like dependencies. So you kind of have to make sure you mark all of these things. And that's just where also my mind feels like spaghetti, you know, we were just said. So it's like, I think it's a challenge. I think it's always going to be a challenge to do it perfectly. But if it's always off, like the product person should be like, hey, like I'm doing, like we need to fix something here. Like I need to be writing either better stories. Like maybe they don't understand what needs to get done either. So then like maybe the story wasn't very clear. So they thought it was one thing, then it's really another 10 other tasks that then ended up making it much bigger. That was kind of a long answer, but yeah, it's a good question.
Thank you.
And Philip.
Hi, it's not like a question, but like I'm not sure about everyone else's background, but I graduated, it's about to be a year that I graduated boot camp. I was basically brand new to coding life. It's like more like of what do you suggest for people like me to do in terms of like coding wise and languages, and what to expect from like a New Year's perspective on like interviews and what to expect from a team. That's basically like we just wanted to hear like your like advice on something like that. That would be great.
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And you know what? It's a little bit of a shame. I think I've only interviewed like 1 or 2 engineers at my company. Like all the engineers interview the engineers, which I find like also kind of odd, because also I'm going to be working so much with them. And I think I've only interviewed maybe 2 over, you know, at least being in this role like almost 3 years. So that's kind of interesting. I'm hoping also if you're at a smaller company, you would have a chance to also interview with the product person. So I guess I'm only speaking from a product perspective, but I think a lot of the things that I said earlier like still hold true. I think I want to see that you would have a desire also for learning what the user problem was and trying to understand the market. So for example, like my product is in KYC. I don't know anything about KYC when I started in that department, but I learned so much when I first joined, and I said I would be willing to learn. Like I didn't know anything when I first started, but I want to learn, what is this user problem? What are these users trying to do? You know, who are they? Are they old? Are they young? Have they been in banks for a long time? Like, do they have long hours? Like, what are they doing all day? Like, I really want to understand them. And I think kind of showing that curiosity for understanding who our users are, I think to me would be really big in like any interview, kind of just showing that passion of trying to understand what we're doing and why. And then also like in terms of languages, I'm not gonna give you an answer you like, but I'm actually I really don't know, which is horrible because I am so far removed in terms of like the requirements that Moody's has for what languages that you need. So I apologize for that. But to me, it's about attitude, and I feel like to a degree, like anything can be learned. And I think like Callie's a great example of that. You know, like she's very much self-taught, and I think that's why she's also doing so well at Moody's is like she just raises her hands for things, and she just like she took this other exam for this new accreditation she just got, and she studied like first in the entire group. And like I think just kind of putting energy where your mouth is, and I think just kind of focusing on that is what's going to shine through. Because I didn't know anything when I started either, but I wanted to learn, and I think having that attitude is the most important. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, though. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Totally. Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. Well, it's been so nice joining you all today. I think Callie said that I'm supposed to like put you in groups or like something because you review each other's code. So maybe I can do that. Is that what I'm supposed to do? Don't, this I'm being recorded. Wonder if I can do that actually. Maybe I can form.
I think I see someone with their hand up, or I don't know if you saw them. I'm not sure if that was like a hand that never went
Oh,
down
that's
after
what I
they asked.
assumed. Oh my
It
God.
was.
Question?
I just turned it off. I
Okay,
just turned it off.
that's what I assumed. I was like, I think it's still up, but thank you. I do have the ability to do breakout rooms. Is that what Callie usually does?
Yeah, she
Uh,
she just opens the breakout rooms, and then if someone wants to go in for like code reviews, then they can go in. So she opens up a lot of them.
Cool. Okay. So maybe I'll
I
do.
would also like stop recording so we don't get like a long recording of the Zoom, just so you know.
Solid. So we don't get little recordings of like everybody.